Today we're going to do a reading comp passage, and in that spirit, I want to make it clear that the best way to get good at reading comprehension is to slow down and understand what you're reading. Now, that might sound simple and obvious, but people don't do it, right? If you do reading comp now and you spend most of your time reading the questions and answering the questions as opposed to reading the passage, you're probably doing it wrong. You're probably not spending enough time trying to understand the passage. Just as a general rule of thumb, not that you should keep track of this at all, because focusing on time is itself a distraction. I spend about half the time reading the passage and about half the time answering the questions, right? That is not normal from my observations of people in class when they first start studying for the LSAT. They read the passage in about 1 to 2 minutes, and then they spend anywhere from 8 to 12 answering the questions, right? And a lot of that is because they don't understand fully what they read. They're so anxious to get into the questions that they have a vague understanding of the passage and then fail to figure out the answer. And then they have to go back and actually end up rereading the passage or rereading the question multiple times. Yeah. You don't need to worry about finishing the section at first. Just think about each individual passage. If a passage ends up taking me 10 minutes, I'm not saying it should. Maybe a passage should take you the whole 35 minutes. But if a passage took me 10 minutes, generally speaking, about half that time or 5 minutes, I spend actually reading the passage. Again, I don't want to talk about time too much because I don't want you to sit there looking at your clock, asking yourself, oh, did I spend half the time reading the passage? No, I don't care. I'm just trying to illustrate the point that most people rush through the passage too quickly. And then over time, as they get better and better at reading comp, they actually end up spending more time reading the passage. And that makes them go exponentially faster through the questions and the answers. How do you do that? What does that look like in practice? Well, what actually happens is these passages are made up of sentences. Anyone know how many sentences are in one passage typically? There's about 15 to 16 sentences. That's it, right? That's not very many. And what we're doing is we're reading the first sentence, we're making sure we understand it, and then we're going on to the next sentence. What a lot of people do is they read too quickly, they have a vague sense of what the first sentence is saying, and then they just plow into the second, and then they plow into the third. And that's not how I do reading comp, and that's not how I would suggest that you do reading comp. You read the first sentence. If you don't understand it, you reread it, right? Now, there are some exceptions. Maybe you read it and you're like, wow, I don't know where the author is going with this, and you might need the next sentence to give you a little more context. But that is not the rule. That's not the norm, yet that's what a lot of people do. They just plow through the passage, right? What else is helpful in trying to understand? Well, one way to think about this is imagine that you're going to become an attorney someday, and you're going to be in a law firm, maybe, right? And you're a new associate, and the partner comes to you and says, hey, can you read this email or this document or this memo from one of our clients and tell me what it's about? What do I need to know about this document? And you're not going to read that quickly, and you're not going to read it lightly. And as you read it, you're going to try to understand, like, what's the main point? What is the main thing I need to take away from this document? Why did the client email us about this whatever issue, right? Like, what was the purpose behind this email? And then when you're done, when the partner comes back, you're going to be able to look at him or her and say, hey, look, this is the problem here. This is the problem, and here are the 2 reasons why it's a problem, or whatever, right? That's what you need to be able to do with these passages. You need to be able to read them and say, hey, look, this is why this author was saying something, And this is why the author thinks it's important. So one question you can have in the back of your mind as you're reading all of these passages is, why are you, the author of this usually god-awful passage, why are you wasting my time? What is it that is so important to you that you need to get conveyed, right? And if you keep coming back to that idea, why are you wasting my time? Then you're much more likely to walk away from the passage with a clear understanding of the author's main point or why the author sat down to write this. And if you have that clear understanding in your own words, then all the questions, even though they're not all main point questions, are going to become much easier because they all touch on the main point to some degree or another. Even questions that ask you, hey, what do the opponents of some theory think? Well, your understanding of the opponent's view is colored by your understanding of the author's main point or the author's view, right? Like you can understand what the opponents believe precisely because you also understand what the author believes or the proponents believe, right? The main thing you want to walk away from when you leave this passage is a solid understanding of the author's main point. Okay? Like, okay, I get why you wrote this. This is what you thought. And you're saying that in your own words. A lot of times when people finish these passages and I'm tutoring them one-on-one or we're in a class setting and I say, hey, what was the main point? And they start to go back to the passage. They look back at the passage and they start scanning and rereading things. To me, that signals that they weren't engaged enough and weren't trying to process what the author was saying as they were reading it. Right? They were just kind of going through the motions of reading as opposed to really trying to, oh, okay, let's have a conversation and here's what I think you're trying to say. Right? Oh, here's the sentence I read. Here's what I think it's saying. What do I think about that? Do I think that's dumb? Do I think that makes sense? And then where do I think the author is likely going with this sentence? Where do I think the author is going to take me? And then we continue reading. And as I continue reading, observing how I was either right or wrong, not that it's about being right or wrong, it's more about that conversation that you're having with the author so that you know you're on the same page as the author. Because if you're in line with the author, if you're reading the passage and you're like, yeah, I see what you're saying, I get it, then the LSAT can ask you whatever question it wants and you can predict an answer, and 95% of the time, your prediction is going to be very, very close to whatever answer they end up giving you.